I guess you love movies. I do too. Hi guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. And today we're doing another My Favourite Movies video. And as I said in a recent video on my my month in movies of August, I said that I might be doing a My Favourite Movies video on Apocalypse Now. And as we are getting closer to the UK release of Megaropolis, and I think the US release, it's in September I believe, I thought that I would do a few videos on Francis Ford Coppola, a director that has had a very interesting career. And of course his run in the 1970s was arguably one of the greatest runs in the history of directors in Hollywood, because he made The Godfather Part 2, The Conversation and Apocalypse Now. And all of these movies are present in the background of this video. The Conversation, a movie that very few people talk about, and I mean, people talk about it, but probably not enough. It's probably Gene Hackman's best performance and a movie I'd love to talk about one day, but we're not talking about that today. We're talking about Apocalypse Now, which is genuinely one of the greatest movies ever made, and everyone seems to say that, and you know, there's a reason. Because it's awesome. And every time I watch it, it expands its concepts, it becomes more and more interesting, more and more dark, and that's really what this movie is about. It's about the dark underbelly of America, and I'll get into that as we go on along this video. But first of all, what I want to talk about is how fraught the production of this movie was, because I think it's just as iconic as the movie itself is the production, because there was so many things that went wrong. First of all, Martin Sheen wasn't originally cast as Willard, it was Harvey Keitel. Harvey Keitel was fired after a couple weeks of shooting. From what I understand, I don't really know why, it's not really public knowledge. But he was fired. There are actually apparently a handful of establishing shots where Willard is on the boat, which is actually Harvey Keitel. So he has a credit, I believe, for the movie. Like it's not listed in the main credits, but if you go on IMDb, you can find Harvey Keitel's name as like basically an extra in the movie. But of course, Martin Sheen took over from him, and that didn't go too well either. Obviously, the performance is awesome, but he had a heart attack. That paused production. Coppola was struggling with the multiple governments. I believe it was shot a lot in the Philippines. This is all in the Heart of Darkness documentary, which is on the brilliant box set here, including the Redux version. And he goes into how he had to deal with when he had helicopters and when he didn't have helicopters, and when he had napalm and he didn't, and all of these issues. He had the sets destroyed by a hurricane at one point, and of course, infamously, Marlon Brando turned up to set not knowing his lines and being massively overweight, meaning they had to rewrite the script in order to make it so that Kurtz was overweight. Originally in the Heart of Darkness book, which this is of course based off of, Kurtz is skinny, but Brando was definitely not. So with all of this being said, you can forgive Coppola for making a movie that was a mess, that didn't quite work. He didn't do that. He made maybe the best movie he's ever made. And to be honest, I don't think you can really make a movie like this if you're not a little bit crazy. And he was definitely a little bit crazy making this movie. I think he slept with a loaded gun. Like, this was wild, this production. There are things I haven't even mentioned because I'd be here all day just talking about the production of this movie. But let's get on to the movie itself, because I think what's so brilliant about this film and about Coppola's best work is that it's really a dissection of the American aesthetic. The Godfather is, of course, the dissection of organised crime and the corruption within that and its connections with the government. But this is more about the seedy underbelly of the American military, and specifically the military-industrial complex, and how it is kind of omnipotent from the government and from the values that America was founded on. And as you go along, these things become very obvious. And to be honest, they're pretty obvious from the start. Willard, drunk and incapacitated in his hotel room, he's left Vietnam, but Vietnam has not left him. And he knows he can't go back. There is no going back. And in a sense, for America, there was no going back after Vietnam, because the military-industrial complex was exposed for what it was. It was no longer, we're going to help the Brits in Europe against an evil force like the Nazis. It's like, we're going to Vietnam to fight communism because it's clearly so close to our shores. And the American people saw through it and started to see that this wasn't to protect the values of America. It was for gain. It was for profit. And that is what Apocalypse Now is about. It's about working class people sacrificed at the altar of capitalism. And this is where the sort of peace and love movement starts to fall apart at the seams, and anger starts to seep through it. And this is very, very obvious, and a very obvious theme, and it's an undercurrent through the entirety of Apocalypse Now. And Kurtz's own story and own descent into madness is really indicative and symbolic of America's descent into a type of madness in of itself. But outside of the philosophical and societal discussions that the movie brings up, it is a technical masterpiece on every level. It may be one of the most ambitious movies ever made, and I think that's something that you can always expect from Coppola. Whatever he makes, is that he's going to swing for the fences, and whether it comes off or not, he's always going to try and sort of push the boundaries, and I think that's what we're probably going to see with Megaropolis. Is it going to be a masterpiece? I don't know, guys. The reviews say probably not. But I think what we do know is that it's going to be kind of wild. And that's what I always love about his movies. And I think something about Apocalypse Now that I want to talk about, which doesn't really get talked about enough, and I think that is Martin Sheen's performance. Because Martin Sheen is genuinely fantastic in it. He narrates basically the entire movie. He's actually a great narrator. He has this very mannered way of talking I really like. Kind of deadpan and strange. And he's fantastic in this movie. Like, he's brilliant. But nobody talks about it because he's not the showiest performance. That comes from the side characters. Robert Duvall as Kilgore, who is scene stealing in every scene he's in, which isn't actually very many, actually. He's got some of the most famous lines in the entire movie. I don't have to quote them, you know them already. And he's an extraordinary character because Willard sees Kurtz as this crazed man, but when he sees Kilgore, he realises that madness has already infected this place, that madness is not something that, is not a rarity. He talks about them saying that Kurtz is a murderer, and he says, giving out, saying that someone's a murderer in this place is like giving out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. It's like just ridiculous and absurd, and the movie is about absurdity and about surrealism, but it's more about the absurdity of this war and how it's being perpetuated and why. And Kurtz begins to understand this. And when he loses his grasp on the values that he holds dear, these American values that have been cast out in favour of profit, in favour of self-interests, he begins on a descent into complete madness, an abyss. Like, where do you go when your moral compass is so scrambled that you don't know where is up anymore? And Willard sort of slowly starting to understand Kurtz. Their relationship is so interesting because their relationship is 90% of their relationship is built up before they even meet each other, and it's so brilliant. I love the sequences, the voiceover parts where Willard talks about Kurtz. It's like brilliant, genuinely brilliant. And obviously I was talking about Kilgore just now. Kilgore's amazing. And he's a very interesting counter to Kurtz because he kind of makes Kurtz seem more rational because this guy's also nuts. And obviously Marlon Brando, when he eventually appears on the screen late on in the film, is extraordinary. He has some monologues that some people may say are rambling, but I can see a lot of interesting analogies in his rambling monologues, and he's actually phenomenal in it. Whether he's being fed lines through an earpiece or not, Marlon Brando absolutely nails it. I also think something that's underrated is the actual score for the movie, which is very rarely talked about. This sort of pulsating sort of heartbeat through the whole thing. Obviously it's punctured with brilliant uses of pop culture music, Rolling Stones, The Doors, iconically at the start, but also Wagner, which, anyone that hears that song now just thinks instantly of Apocalypse Now. And I always think that, it was with 2001 as well, where music that's been around for hundreds of years is now forever remembered for being part of a movie from the 21st century. And that's genuinely how awesome these movies are. And I just think, as the movie goes on, you sort of slowly reach Kurtz. And Kurtz is far gone. He's too far gone. And he knows it. He knows he's gone too far. He knows he isn't on this planet anymore, that this sort of moral realm, he's gone to another place. He talks about moral terrors and how you have to make a friend of moral terrors, because if you don't, they're enemies to be feared. And that's the moment you strip yourself of all your humanity, all of your soul, and you're just a person, you're just an object of violence. And maybe you can win some type of victory, and maybe you can win this war, but you'll never be the same again. Who you were before is dead. And as Willard talks about at the start of the movie, you know, you want to return home. While you're there, all you want to do is get home. And when he got home, all he wanted to do was get back to the jungle, because the world you once knew just doesn't exist anymore. And that's why this movie and Vietnam as an event feel so intertwined, because I don't think any movie ever made has ever perfectly surmised and brought to the forefront what Vietnam did for the American aesthetic and the American dream. Because, as I say in a review I did on my Letterboxd, if America had a dream, Apocalypse Now is its nightmare. And this is why it's one of the greatest films ever made, an audacious American masterpiece, one of the greatest war movies ever made, and an astonishing piece of art that every time I watch it moves me deeply, and the perspective that it gives me continues to grow and to develop every time I see it. I really wish someday I can see it on the big screen, and I'm not talking about the final cut, I'm talking about the theatrical version, because the Redux, the final cut, which I haven't actually seen yet, but there's nothing like the theatrical release. It's a masterpiece. I love it so much. So there you go. That is my favourite movies video on Apocalypse Now. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. What other movies do you want to see me review? I think I'm probably going to do a Blink Twice review soon, so look forward to that. I'm probably going to see it tomorrow. And there's probably going to be some more of my favourite movies videos, and maybe some old segments are also going to be coming back to the channel. So if you like the sound of that and you enjoyed this video, hopefully I'll see you next time. Goodbye.